Does everyone have their animal? Does everyone have a sound ready? No, you cannot give your best guess. We don't have the internet in this game. You can't look up what the sounds of your animal are. Yes,
Are our eyes open or closed?
so I had a thing on this one. I'm gonna do eyes open because there might be a risk of injury if it is with the eyes closed. And I don't want to put anyone at risk of injury. Okay. So I'm gonna say, go ahead, get up, make no sounds other than the ones that you think your animal is making, and find your pair.
Roar!
Is that catching everyone? Or is it just really
Once you find your pair, come to the circle and ask them about something from their week.
Right. Let's go.
So we got the goats? Sheep.
This is supposed to be asking you about your week?
Yes.
We are, the three of us are one person. So you are one person, you are free to ask. You're free to ask Zoe or Henry. Okay, perfect. Cool.
How is your week? Or you can type in the chat.
There's no light back here, is there? Okay, we can be right here. Okay. Okay, is this better?
Hello?
Hopefully you can hear us at least.
Yes.
Okay.
Awesome.
Yeah.
How was your week, everyone?
It was pretty stressful.
Exams?
No, just very, very busy. How about you guys?
My week wasn't too bad. I had an exam in the middle of the week, and it went decently well. Like, it wasn't the best exam I've ever taken, but it certainly wasn't the worst. So I consider it a win.
My week was pretty stressful. I take 3 like main big classes, and 2 of them had exams this past
Oh
week.
my.
That was really fun, but you know, at least it's be able to relax.
That's good.
So is there a second food that it's like? Oh, no person. Awesome. Let's see. I'm trying to think, what else did we talk about our week?
I mean, they started off with like, anyone watched the game yesterday?
I did. It was great. It was a good one.
I didn't end up watching because I have another exam coming up this week, but I didn't have to because my neighbors were watching it. I could tell they were watching it because every time they scored, I would be able to hear it because they're on the balcony. So it was pretty noticeable. I knew when they were scoring every time, basically. So
I went home for the weekend, so
Yeah.
no one, people kept asking me about it because they knew that I went to UC, but they didn't really watch it themselves. They're
Yeah.
like, did you just hear about it? And they're like, congratulations. And I'm like, thanks, I guess. Like, I'm not on the team, but all right, cool.
yeah. No,
Yeah, I was. Oh,
I
go
live
ahead.
I live right outside of Top Cats on the other side, so I also have like the TV and people would come view it. So I basically watched it.
I was at the Kroger in Hyde Park today. I had like my Bearcats like a shirt on, and like 2 people came up to me and said, Great game, congrats." I'm like, thanks.
Yeah, I feel like people were treating me like the star quarterback as if I had done something. And I'm like, I didn't do anything.
There's like an interviewer outside of like Lord Wilman meets, and they're like every student walking by, like, are you a fan of UC football? And like they asked everyone. And I walked by and he didn't even bother asking. I was like, okay, I get it, but okay. I think he heard too many no's. He was like, I'm just taking a break with this one. We have that.
I'm not sure. I think this is supposed to last for a little while, but I also don't know what other kinds of things we could talk about. All right, we recently had exams. What class did everyone have exams
I got my physics exam back.
in? Gotcha.
Our class average was a 60%.
Oh, fun.
That's
The
tough.
specific section was a 48%.
Oh.
Ugh.
But actually, I did like low-key kind of good.
Okay, that's good then.
That's good. If you're at least if you're above the rest of them, then the curve should benefit you. You know.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was shocked at how like I thought I failed it.
I think with physics exams, because I took it last year, it's like a hit and miss. Like sometimes like you know everything for the exam and you'll go in and be good. And then sometimes like the professor's just really bad at explaining one content and you're
Oh,
just
yeah.
like you have to fend for yourself. So.
Yeah, like the last question, I think I got like a 9 out of 23 on.
That's tough. I've been there.
Gladly, all my exams this year are multiple choice.
That's
So
awesome.
all my classes are multiple choice, which means, I mean, I get at least a 25% chance.
Yeah, that's good.
Hang on, I think we're gonna head back, so I'm gonna switch the camera around. Feel free to read me real quick.
Feel free to throw away your stocks of paper, keep them as a memento of this time together. Feel free. I'm not.
What?
No,
Do we have any memorable animal sounds? No one wants to demonstrate their animal sound for the good of the cause. That's some bees. Sam, what did you say? What did you do? For reference, Sam and Rhonda had cricket.
Anybody actually could make the sound of a cricket, please do it. Yeah, that's okay.
Wait, what the whale again? The whale is my favorite.
What sound does a whale make?
Yeah.
Y'all didn't watch Nemo?
Any other memorable ones? Who was the other whale did not make a sound. from what I remember. That's pretty much it for me today. I hope you guys like that. A little bit different than the usual serious conversations. I decided, is this the PowerPoint? I do want to click it. No, I need to give it purpose. I need to give it well, I'm gonna find out. So I was inspired by myself last week. And I was like, you know what's a good idea? Keeping up my wholesome meme slide. So I did it. And this is when the slide was. I totally put it. It should be.
Can I see the photo?
Anyways. Alright, my favorite right now. That one?
It's Fernando. It's Fernando.
Yeah, I like it.
I want to take multi-lab right now.
I actually have a document in my Word folder of Wholesome memes that I'm collecting under my slides. So stay tuned. I hope you enjoyed that.
Feel free to submit them to Shivani too.
Oh, I would love to take Wholesome meme submissions. I'll put my phone number. You want to reach me? Send me a Wholesome meme. On our next GlobeEd email. Send me your Wholesome memes, please. Thank you. Let me feature.
Okay, where are our internal people? Oh, they're right there. Yeah, got it. It's like old.
All right, guys, our ghU today is going to be on the social determinants of health. Hopefully, the last ghU on public health kind of introduced you to what these might be. But we'll just get started.
So anybody who's been in GlobeEd before already knows this answer, so y'all can answer this question. What are social terms that come to your mind at this moment? Like the first thing that comes to your mind when you think of that? Not people who've been GlobeEd before. Go ahead. Sorry? Wealth, okay. Anything else?
Where you live?
Where you live, location, yeah. Yeah, they're all social determinants of health. Social determinants of health is anything that will affect your access to a living a, illness-free life, and a happy life, all those things. So social determinants of health are conditions in the environment in which people are born, live, work, play, worship, and age that affect a wide range of health, functioning, and quality of life outcomes and risks. Fancy way of saying, basically how you get access to healthcare and how you can live happily and all those things. The conditions in which we live explain in part why some of us may be healthier than others and why some are not as healthy as we could be. I know that you probably have heard this one before, but like think of people in your community who maybe don't have access to healthy food. For an example, the most common example, like they don't get vegetables, fresh vegetables, you have to go really, really far for those vegetables to eat what's convenient, which is something at the local convenience store. Those people may not be as healthy as those who do have access to fresh vegetables and food and meats and stuff like that. That's an example. Oh, you want to play this video? It's kind of long for 3 minutes, but brace yourself, it's kind of interesting. How do you hit play? It's a good question. Oh, thank you.
I'm Dr. Kamara Phyllis Jones, past president of the American Public Health Association. Kamara Phyllis Jones, past president. You may have heard the saying, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. When it comes to health and well-being, preserving health is always best. But there's more to the story. Imagine that someone is walking along and whoops, they have just fallen off the cliff of good health. And if that were you, you'd be relieved to find an ambulance at the bottom to speed you on to health care. But what else can we do to protect you? How about a net to catch people? But nets have holes, so some people may still fall through, and the net is likely to rip over time. What else can we do? Clearly, we need to build a fence at the top of the cliff to keep people from falling in the first place. But if a lot of people are near the edge of the cliff, even a really strong fence will not be enough. To keep everyone safe, we need to move all the people away from the edge of the cliff. We do that by addressing the drivers of poor health that go beyond our genes and beyond our personal behaviors. Things like low wages and under-resourced schools and unsafe housing. The environments in which we live, work, and play shape our health. These are the social determinants of health. These things can either propel people toward the cliff's edge or keep them at a safe distance from it. But this cliff analogy is incomplete. We need to also realize that the cliff is really three-dimensional. And then to notice that resources and people are not evenly distributed along this cliff. At some parts of the cliff, the ambulance at the bottom may have a flat tire. Or maybe there's no ambulance there at all. Maybe there's no net, nor fence. And usually, at those parts of the cliff, the people are being pushed closer to the edge. These are the differences that lead to health disparities in a population. Differences in the speed and quality of the ambulances represent differences in quality of care. Differences in the presence of ambulances, nets, or fences. These represent differences in access to care. And differences in the distance to the edge of the cliff represent differences in the opportunities and exposures and stressors that make some people and communities sicker than others. We need to ask a lot of questions. Why is the cliff three-dimensional? Why do some parts of the cliff lack ambulances or nets or fences? And why are some people being pushed closer to the edge?
So as you can see in the video, I think this picture will make some sense to you guys. But are like 3 stages of kind of, I guess, remedying illnesses, but the most common, of course, is just the medical care and tertiary prevention. But I do want to mention this is kind of off topic, not off topic, off topic. But everybody here who's med sci has taken exploring health professions, right? Everybody else, there's a movie called Escape Fire, and it basically talks about this, in essence, which is that our current medical system mostly just deals with care, but it doesn't deal with prevention, and the next step, which is kind of uplifting the entire community. So I highly recommend watching that movie. It's on, I don't know where it's on, the internet somewhere. So you'll be able to find it. I highly recommend watching that movie. It's really interesting, and it'll keep you thinking about more about the social determinants of health and things like that. All right, moving on. That's totally not the point of this, but anyways, here you go.
Right. So these are the 5 main social determinants of health: economic stability, social security and context, neighborhood environment, healthcare, and education. All these are major determinants of how people will, things that will affect their health without being directly affected to medicine. On the next slide, you can see how we've broken this down. Economic stability, stuff like poverty, housing stability can affect how you live and how your health is there because of poor quality conditions. Poverty itself is a very intersecting social determinant of health because it can affect a bunch of these, including education, access to healthcare, such as transportation and insurance. But now let's just go to breakout rooms. You'll be using this in the breakout rooms, by the way.
So for the breakout room, I put it in the word chat. There's the document, otherwise it's also at the bottom of the slides. We're just going to be having a little mini discussion, not too long, and then we have a much more interesting-ish activity with you. So, but this is just to get you guys thinking about social health, and I'll go back to the slides so you guys can back to it. Oh, right, good point. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, 1 from Kirtan, and 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1. Each one of you are 1, 5. 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4. All right. I guess 1s you can get around here. 2s over here. 3s, 4s, and 5s.
Hello, are you too? Oh my god.
We're
Oh my god.
Oh, Henry, hello. Sorry, continue. Okay, The virtual group is joining the fives.
Really good job.
Also, small announcement about the questions, you don't have to cover all of them, you don't have to cover any of them. But just, whatever you want to discuss, you can go ahead, just kind of talk about student trans health and yeah, so they're just to guide you.
That made me so happy. So beautiful. And I felt like I did something to better someone's life for once.
I'm Sam, and on Friday night I went to the new oyster bar in Over the Rhine because I love oysters, and it was so good. So that was fun.
Right. Hi, I'm Noah. I'm also representing the virtual people. So we have Zoe and Henry with us. Are we just doing what we did this weekend? Most interesting fun thing I did last month. That's a tough one. I've been home a lot because my mom has been moving. So I've been having to move a lot of big, heavy things, and it's not been a good time. But it's kind of interesting. So instead of, getting my stuff done, I'm getting other people's stuff done. We have everyone there. Excited to everybody. Okay. All right. I think we can try to get started. See if they type it over here.
The first question is, how do each of the social determinants of health impact us in our health
If you have maybe higher education, you know more about the effects of healthcare, healthcare, because people living on education.
Is there a certain one that you think that stood out to you?
Obviously, if you have stable income, you can afford healthcare. Whereas if you're unemployed, it's hard to pay for it.
What question do you have? Okay, take your time. But again, you have to focus on the questions. Just
I think also
Yeah, I feel like all these things kind of lead to one another. Like, if you have food insecurity, maybe you're more likely to commit crime, which means you're more likely to be incarcerated, which means you're less likely to be able to access certain services. And it just sort of all snowballs. I think at the end of the day, I'm all about poverty because the way that it's structured, especially here, is that if you're in poverty, you can't afford care, like bottom line. And there's no like real safety net, like they talked about in the video.
I think it's a good segue into like the second question, like, which major social determinants of health do you think are the most impactful on people's health? And I would agree with you that poverty definitely, I think, is an umbrella for everything. Because if we say economic stability is like the most important, right? If you have enough money, you can access health care. You can go and move to a different neighborhood or environment, and you can pay for a private education or go to a very nice public education. Right? So having, economic stability can really open a lot of those doors for you. Whereas if you take one of the other ones, it doesn't really help, right? So you can get an education, it just takes longer. Like that education might be able to get you access to other things after a while. But I feel like if you are not part of it, it gives you like more of an instantaneous kind of success.
Right.
To all these other things. It's also pretty hard to like isolate every one of them because they're all like you can't find one that is isolated by itself because one thing is going to affect something else and it will just keep spiraling out until it hits everything.
Exactly. One thing I think is interesting is that like provider competencies on there. So that's an example of like the United States probably has like one of, if not the highest, like provider competency of like any country in the world, and yet there's so many people that can't access that competency at all.
Yes.
Yeah, I feel like our measures of competency don't consider like racism.
Yeah.
So
True.
yeah, it's just to say.
I mean, I remember, I don't know if you guys have ever seen Last Week Tonight with John Oliver ever, but he did a segment about like racial bias in medicine, and there was this study that conducted, I mean, it was a ridiculous amount of people in medical schools at the time that believed like black people literally had thicker skin than other light-skinned people, and therefore they didn't feel as much pain.
Yeah.
And it was like a staggering, it was like 40% or something ridiculous. Like you really go to school for this.
Yeah.
Like the fact that this is how it is, or I can't remember which student it was, but there was a medical student who paired up with another one somewhere who like wrote a book about skin diseases for people of color because all of the skin diseases in textbooks are for white people. Like at least historically it happened before this one. And so they all present differently. And so the doctors really can't be competent because they weren't trained for it. So you get like eczema or something on a white person and it looks different on someone who's brown or black. You literally just don't know. Maybe they're not competent enough to do it. And it's kind of crazy to think that something that's like that easy to overlook could cause so many problems for so many people, but it was just that simple.
It's crazy. In race-based medicine, you would think it's something that would be relegated to like a super racist conservative town, but even UC's medical has, they still follow algorithms that measure kidney function that are based on the premise of like certain races having different levels of activity, which is not true. So it's kind of.
I always see this statistic about how like the infant mortality rate.
We're going to come back to the main group in 4 minutes. So
the infant mortality rate or the maternal mortality rate or something like that is so much higher among Black women who have white providers versus Black women who have Black providers. Yeah. So it's just like, and then of course like that gap in itself, like you can attribute to a bunch of this stuff too.
I volunteer as a doula at the Planned Parenthood here as a abortion doula, and all the time, like the Black patients who come in have so many stories of like doctors who helped them either with the previous pregnancy or an abortion and like ended up scarring their lung tissue, very like physical material effects on their health that will be passed down to generations. So it's more than just like a ideology problem.
Yeah.
How much more time do we have for the main group?
For the main group, we'll probably have like 3 minutes. And we'll have like, we have 0 minutes now and then 5 3 more minutes for the main group. Just a few minutes.
Okay.
Have you chosen to share back?
Does anyone want to volunteer to? Does anyone want to volunteer to share back?
You guys got this. You're talking.
You can like switch off.
Yeah.
You're just staring at each other.
Right, and I set the breaker room down on the like on the group meet. So if you have to hit things, let's go ahead.
No, when we go back, they'll ask us to all like share. Just because I'll probably have to bring the laptop around again.
Oh, that's so smart. I just put a piece of tape for like, I feel like that's definitely not the better yet. I know.
Thank you.
Oh, what I do instead of trying to move the camera every time is I hit the little, oh, it's unmuted, cool. I hit the little down there and switch the actual camera source.
Gotcha. And you can do that when they're like presenting, like when they're showing back.
I don't know what I do. Oh, that's up to you now.
Awesome. Thank you.
No, what I do is whenever I want the front camera, I use the front camera USB option.
All right, we're going to be closing down in a minute, so be sure to choose someone for to present back to the main group or just discuss your main points. Does any group want to start?
All right, so we're gonna go back to the main group session now, so we'll start with group 2. Yeah, cool.
So one of the things we talked about was how important economics is in terms of like your socioeconomic status and how, because of how society works, if you tend to be on the upper end of the spectrum, you also are granted a lot more resources than those who are less privileged and not able to access those resources, even though everyone should be granted the same amount of access to healthcare, but it's just not how it is. So it causes disparity.
I agree, that's very, no matter where you are in the world, that's true. Anyone else wants to go? All right.
So I was really discussed like 3 main ideas. One of them was the environment grant, so the enrichment relates to poor neighborhoods, the access of healthcare they get, and the proximity of healthcare that they're receiving. The second idea discussed was higher education. So if you're more higher education, or you went to a better school, you might know where to get healthcare, and other education tips that you can use on getting healthcare. And our third idea was having a stable income. If you have a stable income, that means you can afford a variety of medications and trips to the hospitals, whereas if you're unemployed or homeless, it's going to be tougher for you to achieve those things.
Yeah, that's so true. And I like the point brought up about education because I'm doing like research on health literacy actually. And that's a big thing because the education that you receive, your level of education is the number one, and obviously it should be the number one determinant of health literacy. So a lot of people who have low health literacy are a little bit lower in the education spectrum, so they have trouble understanding what their doctors are writing, what the prescription means, what they're telling them, all these things. All right, goals and stuff. All right, cool.
Hi, I'm Akash. My pronouns are he, his, and our group talked about the first off, we started off with the enrollment in higher education. We have seen that having a higher education impacts financial security and in turn has an impact on health outcomes. We are also talking about the waiting times for services. Like we have experience, first-hand experience in UC Health Clifton area where students have had to wait for up to 4 hours, something like that. And we compared the public versus private healthcare. I think it ties in with the financial aspect of social determinants. From the country where I'm from, there was a huge disparity during the COVID era between the private healthcare and the public healthcare, and the disparity was growing every day. So it's a huge factor. And then we also talked about crime and violence. If you are in a place where which has a high crime rate, you are like less likely to have a great health care. And then Perry will cover the other global aspects of the sorry.
Yeah, so more on like crime and violence. We talked about how like poverty and crime and violence are kind of interconnected. And there's like a circle that forms. So like what I mean by that, so say like you live in a very impoverished neighborhood, you have like really low resources, so you don't have a choice but to resort to crime. Once you commit a crime, you get put in jail, you get incarcerated, and then there's like families without fathers, and then everything gets like separated, and then like since you go to jail, like everything gets put on your record. You can't find a job either when you get out of prison. So that leads to like a circle of poverty, and you know that circle of poverty continues, and it's like really impossible to get out of it. So it's definitely like a social issue, and we definitely need to address that. So.
Yeah, great points by both of you. The intersections between the social terms of health are definitely like a major issue because one thing can spiral into another. Group theory, group one.
Our group talked a lot about education, not just the education of those facing disparity, but education of the general population. People don't necessarily understand how poverty works, or they don't know that food deserts exist, or they don't understand how expensive it is to be poor. So just educating the population in general to create advocacy and to create more equity and build bridges to help people escape the cycle of poverty is very important. And on top of that, education of yourself, people facing disparities, they don't know, they might not even know that they have high cholesterol or that they have diabetes. So how are they expected to treat it? They might not even know how to make certain appointments, to schedule it in with their time. It's just it's difficult, and a lot of people aren't able to understand that to help them.
Yeah, great points. Education and like even improving like all the social determinants of health can also intersect. So good points. And finally, we'll go to group one.
All right, hi guys, my name is Cynthia, my pronouns are she, her, hers. We're group one, and so you guys discussed a lot of things that we did, so I thought that would be kind of cool to talk about some like specific interesting things that we talked about. And one of the things that we learned is that in Cincinnati itself, like the coal mining in the east causes bad air quality here, and that itself just shows how location can impact our social determinants of health and like our health in general. And oh my gosh, my computer shut off. Okay. And then for the second one, we talked about blue zones, which are areas around the world where essentially old people live together and they have like the space to like collaborate and have access to resources. And so this itself causes an increase of life expectancy and just creates a sense of community because a lot of issues for old people are that they're alone, they don't have a lot of access to resources and they can't really go to places. So the blue zones thing is really cool. Yeah, that's basically it.
Actually a perfect segue at this point because we're going to talk about society and mention society. It's not much perfect. So we always do this as much as we can, which is our home, and then we talk about our partners. So we'll start first with Cincinnati, which the largest barrier for those living in Cincinnati is poverty, which you might be able to know. And a lot of that financial instability leads to having more difficult to access healthcare, eat good food, have a good place of residence, get good education. And then, as you know, like the American public school system works based on where your location, and funding of the school, and so on and so forth. It cascades from there. And there's a lot of social stratification in this area, and it occurs in other parts of the United States too. And graduation rates for Cincinnati are lower than national average, so you know that the quality of education and retention of students is not the greatest. I also wanted to add on that there's also a lot of effect of nutrition and access to healthcare are really, really important factors that affect infant mortality. And that's something that's really high in Cincinnati because there's not a good access to nutritious food, and there is access to healthcare, like prenatal checkups and those kind of things. So infant mortality is another like indication of how good that place is, but and the like quality of life, but it's pretty high infant mortality. And then we also have, we look at Mesa, which are partners, and just like Cincinnati, they also have issues with poverty. It's a major barrier. However, they also have issues to access to education and quality of healthcare. There's a very low focus on mental health, which is something that is common with a lot of countries. And there's refugees face a lot of problems, including food security, stresses related to political instability, and far more likely to face poverty. And all of these are social aspects, but they are huge social determinants of health that like affect your access to healthcare and living quality and your quality of life. All right, here you go.
Yeah. Oh, one other thing I wanted to mention is that the refugees that come to Mesa and that SAW partners with, they also face like symptoms of discrimination and of exploitation. So that's also like a major social determinant that SAW is working to defend against. So let's talk about how SAW reduces some of these barriers or issues that affect the social determinants in Mesa. So one of the more obvious ones is the healthcare house. It provides direct access to healthcare, specifically antiretroviral treatments. It is the only center for where HIV patients can stay and get access to those treatments. There's also the migrant learning centers, which we kind of help out with when we go on our road trips. And this is when this directly affects education. Helping people get their GEDs will help them get into colleges and basically just have a better life, job security, so on. All right. Finally, one of the major things we donate to, where most of our money goes to, is CHOP, and that directly leads to education and healthcare access. For those of you who don't know, hopefully you guys do know, CHOP helps educate peer leaders in a bunch of like reproductive health and just healthcare in general. So educating them helps them educate others, which in turn makes health better in the community. And finally, we have youth shelters, which includes like the safe house and the board house. And these provide shelter and food security through their services. All right, and we have our final break activity. Yay. We're going to hand out posters and markers. You can see the document, but basically you're going to just draw an illustration or just make a poster of like one of the social determinants of health and how they would be ideal in like your ideal world.
So think of it just think of it this way. It's just you are going to create your own little ideal world, which each of you have been assigned one social determinant. You're going to solve that social determinant in your ideal world. And there are some questions to do with that. But you can just draw out or write out up to you what you are going to do in your ideal world.
I'm gonna try to switch the camera up onto the group here so it seems like a little bit more normal. I'm gonna see how that goes. Able to do this? Most of it. Education.
But we will give it to you too.
You know, it's kind of matches their clothes. You can always trade with others.
Deal.
I just heard about this right now. Sorry guys, no rush.
All right. What do we want to do? What'd you say? Okay. Pros and cons of like.
Yes.
You mean like things that they have and things that they don't have? Okay.
So like, where you get the higher education versus where you get the differences.
Right.
I'm gonna borrow one of the clothes if you don't want.
Yeah. Whichever one.
Out of curiosity, when you say design, like what do you mean? Is it like we're drawing like a little map of our world and we have to explain
No,
it? Is
like
it
your
just
solution. Like here's your solution. If you were like God and you could snap your fingers, fix it, how would you do it?
I got it.
You get it?
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. So what do we want to fix with education?
If I were the god of the world, then I would start with having, I would abolish all educational institutions as they currently stand. I would have community-based education, so like the things that I think are best for everyone, community teachers, so that's basically, you guys know what teachers are?
Just to give you guys a quick idea, what like another idea rather, it's kind of just like pretend that you are God, kind of. You can snap your fingers and fix it. What would you do to fix it, if that makes sense? Like, what is your initiative that's going to fix it for everybody, or for somebody, or for people in your city or your country? It doesn't matter, but you know what I mean.
Honestly, I
Yeah.
You can't finish it. We don't have the education. You see the problem? This is why.
Again, if I want, if you want more colors.
So how does the teacher?
So this was popularized during the 1960s when they were trying to get the U.S. activists were trying to get the U.S. to pull out of their imperialist intervention in other countries. They started with these educational workshops, colleges all across the U.S. So people would meet at parks or libraries, more accessible on how to people in the community.
So what you guys in game club?
And they would get together, play music, and then like pick a topic to talk about. So for example, they would talk about like imperialism and how the U.S.'s involvement in this war was fueled by a desire for like guns and arms and not the reasons they said they were in that country. So basically exposing like things that are kind of ingrained, that we just not uncomfortable to things that we actively are part of and don't realize that we are. So a lot of like critical race theory happens in these workshops. The biggest thing is just that they're more based on the model of learning. Kind of what we do is it's not hierarchical, so there's no like one instructor who is like educating everyone. It's kind of like learning together. They call What about you?
Whatever you guys think.
Obviously, but like something vocal or like regional, somewhere else.
I like that.
Who knows what's happening? Is it hierarchical or hierarchical or hierarchical?
Hierarchical. So you're going the right.
No, that's correct, that's correct.
If we just say with enough confidence, nobody will know. Yeah, we just, we do it.
You say not home education.
Can you go forcibly remove red from somebody?
Yeah, right? Yeah, I got you. You got it. Maybe like a feminine,
That's right.
Okay, I'm gonna draw money.
Orange.
You also mentioned having education that's led by community.
What picture would I draw?
Draw like the stage, trying to
Good. I feel like we should say something about how we should get rid of like the school zoning concept.
Hey Sam, I want to pass over that red. Thank
True.
You guys need any colors? Let us know. Me and Trevor aren't really doing anything, but just walk the
Huh? Yeah. I'm gonna draw a menacing looking fence.
I think a menacing fence is a little. Also, it is kind of crazy to see school districts the way they're drawn out though, because it almost looks like they were also gerrymandered. Like it's insane to think that gerrymander would apply to like in elementary school for like third graders, you know, but it does. Yeah, and how it's almost it's a complete like if it were a Venn diagram, it would basically be. It's insane.
Thanks.
I didn't know.
I'm gonna make this person angry.
Yeah, make them the bad guy, so it looks like we're getting rid of them for a good reason. I love the eyebrow change. Perfect.
Anything else I could fit here?
I'm thinking probably access to food, like if there's a way to fix that, because I know that like a lot of schools, like, for example, they provide lunch, but they don't really provide other meals a day. And like, at least for me, right, like the school that I went to, like growing up, like we were like in the top 5% of people that had free and reduced lunch. It was like ridiculous. Like pretty much anybody you could take out of the school was on free and reduced lunch. And they've like had so many studies that have shown that the better access to nutritional food you have, of course, you have better education. But the fact that like schools can only really handle one meal a day, I think if there was a way to like, I don't know what it would look like yet exactly, but if there's a way that the community could gather around and provide food for schools for multiple meals for those kids that don't have access to it, that would be a little bit.
There's some CPS that started in urban gardens, so they actually have the students, they pay the students to like work in the garden and like plant fresh food.
Okay, guys, we got about 3-ish minutes left. We gotta discuss it also. And maybe one last one.
Sam, you're really good. What's the cross out thing?
We're destroying the hierarchy. It's what Sam's and it's actually very brilliant. It's supposed to be like, yeah, because Honor is basically discussing how like it shouldn't be a way of like, and here everybody can learn together. It shouldn't just be like you two being like, this is how life goes. Learn it. We're testing on it next week. So like information for multiple sources. And this was Sam's interpretation of getting rid of the hierarchy.
The hierarchy between like honor students and non-honor students is extra. It discourages people to get into the program or whatever. Like,
Honestly, there's so many honor students that like
I'm an honor student. I don't know. I just am. Stupid.
Yeah, so we could like encourage individual talents or something like that. What are your talents? Like something I could draw that represents like unique talent.
Drawing a smaller version of paper. So it can be your artistic ability to represent our ideas of words with pictures. And it'll just be a tiny thing. I'm drawing a tiny little hierarchy of board.
Yeah, you have to explain that.
I was talking about how like maybe paying teachers more or like encouraging like people to get teaching jobs. Like,
oh yeah. The disrespect of teachers is really keeping them from becoming a thing.
Thank you.
I remember my AP physics teacher was like, I would never recommend someone to become a teacher, and I was like, man, that sucks.
Yeah.
And then on the flip side, there are some teachers who are just like, I don't know, I had one Asian guy who never finished class and was almost fired, and like 2 years later, he was like the vice principal. Could not do anything.
That's fine.
So for all the rest of the people that are like super sciencey and can't do art right here, I mean, I'm not med sci, but you get the idea. People like that, right? Do you just like stun on them in class all the time? Is that your role? I feel like it would happen.
This is the only place where I do any kind of artistic anything.
I'd wait for people to start bragging, and I'd like flip over the sketchbook now so that way and just bring it.
Okay, guys, so we're gonna wrap it up in 30 seconds. Not 45. We're gonna wrap it up and everybody get ready to present back to the group that you came up with.
I can still take the individual talent one for that. I don't like how speed. I need to get speed up too fast.
Let's go. Now we're at all right, who wants to go first? Okay, no. What is the order? 1, 2.
All right, well, I'm Rashawn, and we did economic stability. So we got like this train of thought here because we didn't know exactly where we were gonna start. So came with the idea of like disabilities and stuff, and how people with disabilities, they don't have as much access to health because it's kind of like they're kind of looked down upon in society. And in terms of like if you connect people with disabilities and job opportunities and stuff, sometimes like when they want their benefits, I think one of you all talked about like when they marry their incomes combine and they don't get access to as much benefits as they really want.
Or need, really. It's not just want, they need it.
They really need it, and so they just don't marry, I guess.
Yeah, we also, my name is Brooke and my pronouns are she, hers. And we also talked about food waste and how expensive food is and how buying healthy food can really be hard since a lot of it's so expensive. And then we also talked about the importance of SNAP benefits and the EBT and helping people afford food.
And then, hi, I'm Kirtha, my pronouns are she, hers. And so we also talk about cost of living, which kind of ties in what she talked about with the hourly wage, is that most of the time now, like we've not increased the hourly wage to match the cost of living that we have. And so majority of people's incomes are going straight to rent or it's going straight to bills and not having enough money to save for like disposable income or like food and stuff like that.
I was gonna do the last one.
One of the things I read with job opportunities was how like they're perceived. So I think where I grew up, we had a vocational school nearby, and so there's like a stigma around like, oh, they went to vocational school because they weren't smart enough for college, and like that's not the right way to look at things. And we all have a place and a thing to do in society, and we all have to contribute to this movement. And I think that goes along with what Sophie's going to say.
Like you can really see how it was a train of thought now. I mean, we were talking about not only just the opportunities to have good jobs and do train for those, but Shani was talking about the way society sees you working that job. Are we treating people with dignity for doing the jobs that are very necessary? Are we paying people for, you know, how important they are, I guess, in a way? Like people who are working in a gas station, they don't deserve to be not making enough to support their families just because they work in a gas station. Because heck, I gotta fill my car with gas. So, so we should be treating people with dignity, and that's something that's probably going to be important for all of these different social determinants of health. But for economic stability, it certainly shines through. That's our train of thought. Choo choo.
That's awesome, thank you. All right, go.
Howdy folks, my name is Maria, my pronouns are she, her, hers. So our group focused on social and community factors, but more specifically, we talked about mass incarceration and for-profit prisons and how in our ideal world, we are rethinking rehabilitation. So I'll let Emma talk first.
Okay, so I'll just briefly run through this little cycle. So where it really starts is kind of up to you, but we're starting for for-profit prisons, and then you go down to having you come out and you don't have any housing, no
job security and support. And then you go next, because of this, what happens? Well, you face discrimination, you face crime, a stigma. And then it brings you back up into this cycle. And so if somebody wants to talk about a little more into one of these. Okay, so I'll talk about the jail again. So we talked about how the people that tend to end up in jail, while they're in there, they're not educated about like opportunities they have to come out of it. And then without having like job security or housing, they tend to go down the wrong path again. And it ends in the cycle of people who usually end up in jail again. And so we talked about ways that we could break that cycle. And I'll start with one of the first ones. We thought about, so one of them is skills workshops. And we were thinking that like while they're in jail or when they're out of jail, they could be taught about or find skills that they are really good at. And so that could help them find more job opportunities when they get out, which can help them in income and housing and all that.
Some other things we talked about were housing and like pathway towards getting some type of shelter when you get outside of jail. Otherwise, you're just ending up in the same process you were in the beginning with no housing, no support. So you need to build up those fundamentals first in order to stop the cycle of coming back into jail. And the other thing we mentioned was counseling. So by counseling inmates while they're in jail, it allows for them to reflect more than when they were before.
One other thing we talked about was education and how typically when they're coming out of the incarcerated, they don't really have any opportunities. Like they might have just had a high school diploma, or maybe not even a college education, or maybe not even a high school diploma. So some sort of system to get them a GED or further education could really help alleviate that cycle.
And then I guess too, another thing that we were kind of talking about with this is that, yeah, we can look at ways to break this cycle, but we also challenge that you think about ways that we can maybe, you know, rethink what rehabilitation means. Does it have to be jail? Does it have to be prisons? Can it mean and look like something different where we're giving our community members like access to the resources that they would need to be, you know, better functioning members of society? So I think I will leave you all with that in notes, and we'll go to the next group.
Awesome.
I'm Vishnu. We did neighborhood and community, and we came up with like a bunch of different problems that we found related to this determinant, and then came up with some solutions that you could do. So for example, one of the big problems that we identified were misconceptions in medicine. So like a really good example is, say you have a neighbor, Greg, who has a similar illness to you, and he decides not to use his medication like he's supposed to help him fight the illness. And because of that, you might look at that and think, well, if he's not doing it, why should I have to do it? So like that kind of thinking can spread and can like really just mess up a whole community's health because one person doesn't realize how important following a medical routine is. So a solution of that would be to educate the community about the importance of listening to your doctors, following your prescription and all that. Another problem could be isolation, in the sense that, say, you need to go to a certain place, but you need someone to take care of your kids for a certain period of time. That like being isolated, not having like the ability to speak out and ask for help can build up stress because you feel like you have to do so many things yourself, and that can be an issue to you in like your mental health and your emotional health. So being able to build a community, a support group, being able to have that interconnectedness to be able to ask for help and aid is really important because it helps relieve a lot of stress that everyone feels practically all the time now. So stress is a really common thing. So being able to lower that any way possible is always a good thing. And then lastly, another huge issue we found was just restricted access to things like health and then also just good food or food in general. A lot of people don't realize that there are things called food deserts where you or deserts where you quite literally just can't find food. And that's not good. So being able to create resources to allow people access to healthcare and food for free or for cheap is, important because that promotes your health, which is the whole point of this. So like a good neighborhood and community would involve something like this picture, where a bunch of people are able to be connected and they're a team and they're all happy because they're all smart.
Yeah, I hope you remember from our last presentation that community health is public health. So welcome to group 4.
Yeah, so our talk was healthcare. So basically what we said, we came up with, first of all, placing more clinics in lower income neighborhoods, because we observed that there's a lot of like clinics that are not really in rural neighborhoods, in those lower income neighborhoods. So if you're impoverished or something, it might take like more travel time to get to like the nearby clinic. And we also decided to go with like clinics that are not, they don't necessarily have to be like very big like hospitals. They could be just like a support like building that allows like people to find resources in the case of like injury or something. So that's one thing. Something else we came up with is hiring competent health workers to serve the community. Sometimes in healthcare, there are workers that are belligerent, are people that like shouldn't be doing like whatever they're doing. So hopefully we can find like a way to background check them and find out if this person is truly competent for the job, and if so, recruit them for the occupation. So
going off of that, we're also going to talk about like in terms of competence, just like hiring like healthcare workers that are suited or like know how to work with the community that they like are serving. And then also we were talking about like expanding services that insurance covers. Like I think Cindy had a good story about like one of her friends.
Yeah, so this girl in my class was telling me about how she broke her ankle and then she was trying to get it covered by her insurance, and then they were trying to say that like it was a pre-existing condition. So people who have like access to insurance, even sometimes they feel like they don't actually like get what they're paying for because some insurance companies try and like get out of it.
We also talked about like public health sector only to prevent like disparities between private and public health, which you want to expand more on that, or you mentioned that before?
As we talked before, the public and private health sector, where there in the countries where there are two different sectors, have a very huge disparity. So in our perfect world, we just want to have one, which is the public health sector, which will be invested in by the government and will be held to a standard that we expect from a private sector.
And then one last thing we're going to also say, like in the accessibility to our patients, like we want to hire more like translators, because in like specific communities, like English might not be like the main language that that community like speaks. So it's important that if like the healthcare workers can communicate better and maybe even culturally understand that community better. And then also in terms of like primary healthcare, like normalizing more like yearly checkups and like testing for like maybe sexually transmitted diseases, stuff like that. Yeah, so those were some of the solutions that we came up with.
Great problems and great invention and solutions. And finally, we have group 5, education.
All right, guess I'll go. So in this educational environment that we're imagining, the first thing that we talked about was having community-based education. So much of what we have right now is extremely hierarchical. It grants legitimacy only to certain people, certain people can have power. So the world that we're envisioning is community-based, accessible education. We were talking a little bit about how cool it would be to have community teach-ins, which is something that happens in the outdoors, in libraries and open accessible spaces that anyone can come to.
Something else we talked about was having more free meals for students. So a lot of schools, like, they're getting better at having at least lunch for students, but if there was like another possible way so that they could get a free meal, because research has shown that nutrition does correlate with doing well in school.
Some other things we talked about was education from community leaders. So we would bring in well, not us, but someone would bring in local or regional leaders who are experts in healthcare or work in a healthcare organization and educate one school at a time about the current events or just giving them some tips on how to choose the best medication or the cheapest store to get it from. And basically, yeah.
Hi everyone, my name is Noah. I use he, him, his pronouns. Another thing we discussed was encouraging individual talents. So obviously the way our school system works now in the United States, it doesn't really do this. And a quote that I personally like that kind of describes this is, if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will go its whole life believing that it is stupid, right? Because fish aren't meant to climb trees, but its individual talent is swimming. And especially here in the United States, right, where our focus is on math and science ever since the space race, it cuts out a lot of things like art and music and English and literature and all these other things that are very important for us to develop. So it is important to encourage individual talents, and that is one of the things that we like in our perfect world.
Wow, guys, those are some great presentations and great discussions. We're going to quickly go to the last slide. Hopefully you guys realize that, and I heard you guys talk about this, all the groups, talking about how these social trends of health intersect with each other. It's important to note that health does not just include medicine, but it's sort of long before illness. You can talk about the other points. Did you like to do like a positive outlook slide? But this, for social terms of health, is such a vague topic. There's just a lot to talk about. So yeah, health begins outside of the outside of medicine. Breaking cycles of things like poverty, discrimination, all those things will help improve the health of certain populations. So yeah, thanks for having us.
Thank you for listening. I just wanted to mention that although this activity does sound kind of silly because none of these things are as easy as it looks, it's just to get your kind of ideas going. And at some point, every invention, every discovery was thought to be crazy or stupid or impossible, but you never know. So one of these things might actually be the solution to all the problems that we've been facing. You never know. Somebody in this room might be the one who does it. Who knows? So it's just to get your, get the gears going in your brains. That's all. Thank you for listening.
Okay, good job. Excellent posters, everyone. Excellent conversation. We did run a little bit behind, but that's okay. It's for a good reason. Y'all are having fun. For a quick media recap, obviously we're about the social determinants of health. Once again, if you want to be censored from our YouTube, just let us know. And if you haven't filled out the committee form, go ahead and fill it out, or just talk to me and Noah after this. Also, we're tabling on Tuesday. I'm going to let Aruba talk about that.
So our campaigns committee is going to be tabling on Tuesday at Main Street. So we're going to be just teaching people more about GlobeMed and then also trying to sell some of our income generation items, which are right over there. If you guys are interested.
Thank you. And we have divided you guys into committees. So after a collective breath, we're going to ask that you stick around for a few minutes and talk to your committee leader and the other people in your committee. Get to know them, maybe figure out time to meet outside of chapter meetings. So does anyone have a collective breath vote? I actually kind of like the thing Noah said earlier.
I like what Noah said. Yeah, that was really good. I like that one.
Awesome. Right, so just do that one more time. If you judge a fish's ability, or if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will go its whole life believing it is stupid. Which is a very nice sentiment, in fact, of our individual talents and education. Right. Are there any other quotes by any chance? There was one where everyone was popping off. There was like 5 or 6. All right. Well, in that case, we will do our collective breath. So if you are new here, this is just like how we like to end our meetings. So if you would please soften your gaze. Soften your gaze or close your eyes. I don't know why this is so hard this week. All right. And breathe in. And out. All right, well, that concludes our chapter meeting. So like Ajit said, if you would please stay after to meet your committee leaders. These are the committee divisions. And all of our e-board people will still be around. So e-board people that are here, please identify yourselves so people can find you. Or if you have any questions or need to be placed in the committee, please talk to a GR after the meeting.
Yeah, cool. Thank you guys. Thanks for putting it up, but cool. The external wants to meet over here, internal over there, campaigns in the back, service over there, and partnerships over here.